for this morning, we'll just trade off. Our first reading this morning is a poem by Marilyn Murray. It's called Imagine a Heart. And it's not long, but it takes a little dip into philosophy and then psychology, and it ultimately invites us to consider what it means to experience empathy for others. Imagine a heart. Back then, Aristotle said, here's the philosophy. Back then, Aristotle said that luck is when the guy next to you gets hit with the arrow. Years later, Freud said the self cannot imagine its own death, that me, myself, and I live on long after you are gone. Then biology spoke to say that the body, to survive, rejects all foreigners. It's human nature. Now, light years into this century, there's news. The human heart can be transplanted. Your heart can live in me. My heart can live in you. Imagine that. Now, can you feel the arrow? I liked that. That made me happy this week. So, poem on empathy, on feeling the arrows that other folks experience. Our assigned Bible reading for this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, and it's a story about Zacchaeus. Those of you who grew up in church will probably be singing for the rest of the day the song about Zacchaeus was a wee little man, a wee little man was he. This is the story. Entering Jericho, Jesus passed through the city. There was a wealthy person there named Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was, but he couldn't do so because of the crowd, since he was short. In order to see Jesus, Zacchaeus ran ahead, then climbed up a sycamore tree that was along the route. When Jesus came to the spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, hurry up and come down. I'm going to stay at your house today." Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and welcomed Jesus with delight. When everyone saw this, they began to grumble. Jesus has gone to a sinner's house as a guest. Zacchaeus stood there on the ground and said to Jesus, "Here and now, I give half my belongings to poor people. If I've defrauded anyone in the least, I'll pay them back fourfold." Jesus said to this tax collector, "Today salvation has come to this house, for this is what it means to be a descendant of Abraham and Sarah, the promised one, the human one, the child of God, the child of humanity," which, however you want to translate those, that mysterious Greek term from the Gospels, by which Jesus refers to himself. The child of humanity has come to search out and save what was lost. This is God's good news. The story of Zacchaeus. My wife is trying to get me fired. That is the only thing I can conclude from the fact that when I told her earlier this week that I was going to be preaching on this assigned lesson and said I needed to figure out what I was going to say about Zacchaeus, she said to me, "Preach against short people." She can get away with that because she navigates the world from about 5'1", give or take a little bit. So I said to her, that doesn't help me at all. You're just trying to make trouble. And then she started singing that Randy Newman song about short people got no... Right, some of you are singing it with me. Trying to get me fired. For the record, Randy Newman did not mean us to take that song literally. It's about short-sighted, short-tempered people. And he included himself right in the middle of that song. He blamed himself. But a lot of people didn't get the joke. And Kathy was really just trying to get me in trouble. And you see how well I've avoided it. But it's true that Zacchaeus' height is a key detail of the story that Luke highlights here. There was a crowd gathering along the road, And Zacchaeus wasn't tall enough to see what was going on, what all the excitement was. Who wouldn't want to know what the fuss was when there's a crowd of people on the main drag? So Zacchaeus ran up ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to get a better view. Now, according to some of the commentaries, that tree climbing act would have been a serious breach of decorum. People would have mocked the loss of dignity that was going on. I don't know if the story means it for comic effect, but I can buy it. So a grown man hiking up his shorts and pulling himself up into the branches of a tree. It's not something you usually see in public unless the local team has won a championship game and there's too much grease on all of the utility poles. Even so, tree climbing isn't something that you expect to see from a public official. Even a public official who's the sort that people don't look at with respect in the first place, which is the sort that Zacchaeus was. Luke refers to him as the chief tax collector and also as rich. Two things that, taken together, help us understand why the crowd started grumbling when Jesus said he was going to go to Zacchaeus' house. New Testament scholars note that the tax collectors in the Gospels were local officials whose job it was to collect duties and tolls on behalf of the Roman administration. So already they're collaborators who aren't seen too keenly. The Jewish annotated New Testament refers to them as low-level entrepreneurs who kept whatever was in excess of the amount they had agreed to send to Rome. So they, in essence, set their own salaries by adding it on top of what people owed to the Roman Empire. Jericho was a customs center, so business would have been good for someone like Zacchaeus. But as some of his abundant wealth would have come directly from many of the people crowding around Jesus, it's no wonder that they weren't too keen on letting him in on the action and were resentful that Jesus chose to give him attention, unless it was going to be attention that put him to shame. This story is about nothing if it's not about what it means to have a changed perspective. Zacchaeus went up a tree trying to get a new view of the world, and he came down to get a new view of his place in it. Sometimes a different angle is all that it takes to start a serious change in the world. I read a story a couple of weeks ago about a new food truck on the campus of Duke University, which in itself is not really all that remarkable. There's nothing especially interesting, really, about the fact that students at a large university like to stand in line to get food cooked inside of a truck. I had the occasional food truck meal when I was doing my work at Temple. On Westchester University, the main strip through campus has food trucks that are every bit as diverse as the restaurants you'd find down in Center City. Even the little campus at Rutgers Camden has a couple of them at some high foot traffic areas. And I don't think I've ever seen the trailer by my building on campus without at least someone standing in line and talking to the cook inside. Because I guess students just love to eat food that comes from vehicles. So the story doesn't seem all that unusual, except for the kind of food truck that it is. It sits just a short walk from the main dining hall on campus, and it is, in addition to being a food truck, the university's newest interfaith effort. It serves Middle Eastern food like falafel and hummus and shawarma. And well, even that's not unusual for a college food truck. This one is still a little different. The meats that they include in the meals are certified kosher so that Jewish students can eat them, and also certified halal so that Muslim students can eat them. It's an attempt to create community out on the public lawn among people who don't necessarily find themselves in community automatically. A small thing, a minor shift, comes from a big idea or offers some big hopes. There's no question that the many issues that polarize the Middle East are complicated, and the people who created this food truck idea aren't positioning themselves to resolve all of that. But they thought that a small thing like a food truck could at least play a small part in helping to shift perspectives, to give a new view of things. Rabbi Nosson Felig is one of the leaders of the Jewish Chabad group on campus. He dreamed up the food truck with a Muslim colleague, the Professor Abdullah Antepli, who teaches about interfaith relations. The plan for a kosher food truck was already in development, so they figured that maybe they could increase its appeal if they made sure the meats were all halal as well. A Jewish group raised the money to buy the truck in the first place, and they're supporting the certification process to make sure the meats meet both kosher and halal standards. The economics, it costs a lot to do that. But the economics aren't the primary aim of things. Rabbi Felig says, we hope that we'll break even eventually. But we're here to provide a service to the community. We didn't get in this to make money. So far, the truck has been visited by more Jewish students than Muslim students, but they're hopeful that will change in time. The treasurer of the Muslim Student Association stopped by and gave a favorable review, which is also important. The food's got to be good if the students are going to come at all. Antepli and Felig are hoping that the truck's offer of food and an appeal to shared culture, a sense of being both connected to the same place, will also help create a shared space on campus that leads to the discovery of common ground. Again, climb up that sycamore tree for a different view. Sometimes the whole world starts to look different. Sometimes you notice some different possibilities. Another different possibilities story. In 2019, the Reverend Otis Moss III from the Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago was having a conversation with the Reverend Tracy Blackman, who is the head of the UCC's Justice and Local Church Ministries. They were talking about ways to engage their communities in ministry, and their conversation came around to a New York Times article they had both read about a group called RIP Medical Debt. That group started in 2014, and what they do is purchase portfolios of medical debt from healthcare providers and from the secondary debt market. If you've never heard of this, it offers a little window into one of the especially twisted parts of the healthcare system in this country, which is that it gets people so deeply in debt that even the providers and insurance companies give up on collecting that debt in full, so they sell bunches of it to people for, on average, $1 per $100 of debt. So they get it off their hands and get a little bit of that money back. And then typically the people who've bought these portfolios of debt keep going after the people who owe the money so that they don't get any relief from this, which is just one more example of how a healthcare system driven by a profit motive ends up cannibalizing people whose health it's supposed to be paying attention to. RIP Medical Debt buys up that debt and then it forgives it. So Reverend Blackman and Moss's conversation sparked an effort in Chicago in which Trinity UCC joined with a number of other congregations in the city that year, late 2019, and raised $38,000 that they used to purchase more than $5.3 million of medical debt to relieve people of their debt burdens. Earlier this year, the UCC, as a denomination, announced that they had used $200,000 that they got during their Giving Tuesday appeal last year to retire $33 million of medical debt, which brings their total to $104 million of medical debt purchased and paid off since late 2019. Climb up for a different way of looking at things, and the world can start to change. Of course, the view might also raise some difficult questions, like how do we have a system that puts people into so much debt in the first place? And if the debt can be erased for so little money on the back end, why can't it be erased on the front end as well? That, of course, is where we might wish and hope for a whole lot more people to have Zacchaeus moments that transform their lives and their relationships to their broader communities. Because Zacchaeus came down from that tree changed. Maybe he recognized that his accumulation of wealth came at the expense of broader community needs. So he created a program of generosity for himself. Not just of generosity, but making good where he had done wrong, repairing the harm that he had caused. Even the gospel writer wants us to know that this outcome is not a given. It was just one chapter before this story that he told another story of a wealthy man engaging in conversation with Jesus and going away brokenhearted when Jesus said to him, the key to eternal life is selling your possessions and distributing the money to the poor. The people who overheard that conversation started asking themselves, who can be saved? So it's like the storyteller who put this gospel together wanted to give an example. Okay, well, here, this guy, Zacchaeus, this is what it looks like to be saved. Recognizing that you're not separate from the rest of the community, but rather that God is most present when we are most present to each other, when we exist in a state of mutual care and concern, when we support each other instead of exploiting each other. Maybe when it comes down to it, the story invites us or asks us to look more closely at the world that we're a part of. We are not, most of us, I think, engaged in systems of profiting ourselves that are quite so nakedly exploitive as what Zacchaeus did. But it's also true that we can be in that position without even being aware of it. We are embedded in systems that don't encourage us to think about how our comfort and convenience come at the expense of others, both near and far. They don't encourage us to think about who picked the produce on our tables and what they were compensated, about whether the person who packed or delivered our online orders is being monitored and giving enough chances to have bathroom breaks, about whether the person who mixed together our latte and put that wonderful design on the top of it makes enough to pay their electric bill, about how the gas in our cars contributes to changing weather patterns here and around the world. We're not encouraged to think about those things or ask those questions. And the answers aren't always easy to find out in the first place. But maybe the invitation of the story is for us to find our own sycamore trees to climb, to take stock of what we can see, and then to come down and risk new ways of behaving and belonging. And as Zacchaeus found out, that might be costly, but it is also God's good news. Amen.